I'm with you. I'm in the same boat.
I'm old school. Seriously, a lot of this technology, it's really cool. And there are people in our program, most notably, I think, Professor Mackey, who make excellent use of it. Very, very, very impressive and in the service of better teaching. But for me, just doing the teaching is plenty, and trying to get the technology to cooperate can be a challenge. Well, it's good to be back. Good to see everybody here, at least a lot of the people here. I hope you had a relaxing break. Was good for me. Did some traveling, which was nice. Saw my brother in from Texas, which was good. He came in and visited too.
Where in Texas?
He's in Dallas.
I was in Dallas
Really?
the first weekend.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's been there for, I guess, about a year and a half now, going on 2 years from Phoenix, Arizona. So that was good. Bought my mom a car, sold 2 other cars. So, I mean, I can't take much credit, but my brother's, he's a business guy, and he gets stuff done. I like to tell him how it should be. He tells me how it's going to be and what we can afford. So the philosopher comes out in me, regardless. All righty. Well, so some orders of business. I haven't got the tentative schedule of the next exam. Does anybody have that handy when it's scheduled for? Something gave me a creepy feeling that it might have been scheduled for like over the break, and so it should already be turned in, but I haven't posted it yet. But we needed more time anyway because I wanted to get through a little more material. So we've got a second exam, right? And then we've got the presentations, and then there's a final paper. Yeah.
Test 2 you're talking about?
Yeah. Over spring break?
Yeah.
Okay, so I mean, it didn't happen, but that's okay. It would have been okay, I guess, but this will give me an opportunity to ask different kind of questions. I can do more since we'll have covered a little more material. So what I'll probably do is maybe go ahead and post it. Let's see. I want to try to do it by Wednesday. Let me see if I can get it posted Wednesday, and then we could have it due next, maybe like next Friday. Let me look at my calendar here. Because what's going to happen is at this point in the semester, things start to really accelerate, as you know, with all your classes. So what we've got, today's the 14th, so we meet today, we meet Wednesday. We've got next Monday and next Wednesday, right? And then the 28th is supposed to be the start of the student-led discussions. I feel like calling them student-led discussions is less intimidating than presentation because I hope it'll be more conversational with people stopping people along the way and asking for clarification and things like that rather than just a straight through, you get up and present kind of deal. So I'll post an announcement on our Canvas page and let you know what the plan is. And maybe I can even get that posted tonight or tomorrow. Things are kind of busy on my end. But so here will be the plan. We'll have a test 2 coming out probably Wednesday. Probably make it due either the following Wednesday to give you a full week or maybe even the following Friday to give you a week and a half, because the thing is that although you may not be early in the presentation cycle, if you wait too long, what'll happen is getting ready for the presentation will run into writing your paper. And I'll need time to turn around the presentation and the paper because I'm supposed to give you comments on each of those. Comments for the revision on the paper won't be a problem, but comments on what you could do to be a better public speaker seems to me to be a bit out of my area. I mean, I'm a philosophy professor, not an expert in communications or public speaking. I wish I could do a better job. It's just, people have different styles. So, yeah.
Just to be clear, our paper isn't due with our presentation papers, right?
Right. They're separate. I kind of made it so I'll have to get the calendar out myself. I've just misplaced it. But I think I had it set up so that like the rough draft of the paper is due like 2 weeks before the end of the semester or something like that.
Yeah, I thought it was something like that.
Or like 3 weeks, somewhere in there.
I just want to be clear on that.
Yeah.
So I wasn't like,
That way it gives me enough time because what'll happen is to read, I think we've got a total of 11 folks enrolled in the course. 9 of them are face-to-facers, and then we've got 2 online folks, Dave and Leon. So in order for me to get through, 11 6 to 8 page papers, 8-page papers is going to, and give comments, some decent comments, that's going to take a little time. So don't, I wanted everybody to have a good, relaxing spring break so that you can kind of unplug. But Don't let the deadlines sneak up on you. So I'll post a Canvas announcement with a bunch of new information. There is a new discussion post out there. I did post that, I think, last week. And if you could get something before our meeting this next time, before this Wednesday, an initial response up to that post that's out there, that prompt, then that'll, again, kind of it'll help me to know how to tailor, I get ideas sometimes from things people say. So there's that. As far as the presentation schedule, just who's in the on-deck circle, Ben's supposed to be doing the first one on March the 28th, and then I've got Alan down. Now, you said yours was really short, right? Only a few pages? So I'm wondering if there's...
Article's only on 2 pages, yeah.
Are you going to have enough to talk about in 2 pages there? Or are we going to need to supplement that with an additional more? Because there's several GE more things there.
Yeah,
It just depends on whether...
the next one is uncertainty. So if I don't have enough to talk about,
Okay.
I'm still trying to work on understanding.
What he's saying in the 4 forms? Yeah.
Yeah.
'Cause another one that...
GE more.
Oh, yeah, it's hard stuff, definitely. More's not easy. Another thing is, in addition to the certainty one, is the proof of an external world, which is, again, something we've kind of alluded to. I purposely haven't talked about reliabilism or proper functionalism because Bettina's doing reliabilism with Goldman and Zach's doing proper functionalism with Plantinga. I didn't want to steal their thunder, but feel free to, each of you should definitely read those sections in the chapter on non-evidentialist theories to see what Feldman has to say. You may or may not agree with him. You may think an objection that he puts forward is not good, or that there's a response, or whatever. But I left that purposely sort of uncovered so that that'd be material that we could cover during the day that you're supposed to present. For me, this is kind of the first pass through in the sense that you want to have enough material to fill the time. You don't want to have to pad it, but at the same time, if we've said everything we want to say about an article and we have to break a little early, it's not the end of the world. So for today, what I was hoping to do is see if there are any final questions or more things people want me to say about chapter, I guess it's 6, the skepticism part 1, which is what we've kind of been going over. And I feel like this has been a good group in the sense that people haven't been afraid to raise their hand, ask questions, get clarification. So, that's the whole point of this. This is your senior capstone course in philosophy, and if you're feeling like you're not getting something, by all means, let me try to help in any way that I can. So we talked about what he comes to call high standards skepticism, right? Which is just this idea. Then we looked at those different arguments, the 4 versions that he put forward, that in order to correctly be said to have knowledge, you have to satisfy the relevant standard, and in this case, the standard is really high. It always somehow turns out to be absolute certainty, conclusive reasons, irrefutable evidence, something like that, right? And because we don't typically have evidence that's that good for our beliefs about contingent matters of fact, empirical matters, the argument will go through, right? You can derive these skeptical conclusions. And although you might think, well, it's really hard to take skepticism seriously, first of all, this is outlandish, but we are in essentially an epistemology course here. So I think we owe it to skeptics, real or imagined, to try to take these views seriously. And they're interesting regardless, right? You may think, well, at the end of the day, we're going to have our meeting, we'll all go home, go about our daily lives, and there's an external world, and it's populated with middle-sized, stable, ordinary objects, and our senses give us information about that, and then we've got the other sources of knowledge to supplement what the senses can't do. So what's the worry? But as Feldman, and he's good about this throughout the book, I think, he points out that, part of what we'd like is to have a diagnosis of where these arguments go wrong, right? It's one thing to be pretty convinced that the conclusion's not right, but one of the things I really love about philosophy is that you can't escape, in particular, and I think this is good philosophical advice for other courses you'll be taking along the way or in graduate school, is formulating an argument, premise 1, premise 2, premise 3, conclusion. You'll notice Feldman does that all the way through, all the time. He doesn't just make vague references to arguments without actually formulating them. And you'd be surprised how many, in many cases, pretty good philosophers, just because of a stylistic difference in their training, maybe don't do that or don't do it quite as carefully as he does. And what that allows you to do is then go back to, after you've had your discussion and everybody got to say what they want to say, we bring it all back home to, okay, so which premise is the bad premise? Or which ones are the bad ones, right? And I really like that style a lot. I think it's one of the things I treasure about my graduate education, at least, and the time I spent with Rich. So questions from you guys about high standard skepticism and what the sort of, at least what Feldman's response to that is. We talked about it, right? Which is what? What's he going to say about these high standards cases in Chapter 6, right? There's a name for the response, right? So if you're going to reject Cartesianism, you're going to embrace, what is it? Well, it starts with an F. So, fallibilism. Yeah, that's what I was hoping for. So, yeah, I know it's been a while, and I didn't expect you to be thinking about this stuff through the entire break, but we'll get back into it. So, yeah, somebody remind us, what's the basic idea behind the fallibilistic approach? Oh, so good. I'm glad you said that, Tyler, because this is exactly the kind of stuff I want to get clear on, right? So it'd be really easy, and I stress this all the time when I do a little spiel on fallibilism, typically when I do the section on can we ever know anything in my introductory philosophy course, but it's a highly truncated version of what you guys got a lot of when we did the JTB analysis and the Gettier problem. I don't go into that level of detail, but I try to point out to students that because of the name fallibilism, it'd be really easy to think that fallibilism is the view that you can know something and be wrong, that our knowledge is fallible in the sense that you can know a falsehood. That can't be right, though, right? That's not what fallibilism is. Yeah, Zach.
It's like that we don't have to have perfect evidence
Yeah.
for justification.
Absolute certainty is not necessary. We just need really good reason.
Yeah, right. And of course, as you're sort of probably thinking, well, what counts as really good reasons? And in the back of your mind, I mean, I always worry about that too, like how good is good or good enough. But setting that aside, because that's a really hard problem, and I think people are going to want to say different things there. Just to the core point of fallibilism, I just want to make sure people have got it, because I'm going to, like I say, I'm thinking about test questions right now, and I want to be able to ask questions ideally about stuff we've covered, but presumably it'll go, at least what's fair game is up through skepticism 2, at least, if not maybe even the stuff on naturalism for next time or for next Monday. So go ahead, and if you haven't read Skepticism 2, how many people have read Skepticism 2? A little bit? Okay, good, yeah.
Wasn't your question for this week, the discussion first, wasn't that on naturalism?
Yeah, so I'm already way ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah, I put that out there because I wanted to have people writing about stuff that would give me time to work it up. But yeah, so I skipped over, I figured Skepticism 2 we can hopefully cover today.
Okay, I got you.
And then,
Because
yeah.
I saw the discussion first, I was like,
Wow, we already
so we're
moved.
skipping 2, and then I started reading naturalism, and I was like,
Oh,
okay.
okay. No, I don't want to skip 2, but that's okay. If you haven't read it, we can talk about it some. So yeah, just so we're clear on this fallibilism stuff, though, it's the view that you can know something even though it's possible that you're mistaken. And this is a subtle point that's hard to drive home, and I try to do it over and over with people because it confused me when I first sort of was thinking about it, in school, is how can you know something and yet it's possible you're wrong? Well, that's different than saying you can know something and be wrong, right? Because the force of putting in the possibility is to, again, move us from the actual world to another possible way things might have been, where everything is exactly the same except that the statement is false instead of true, right? So just imagine those, we're back to the two worlds, the actual and the alternative one. So we got the actual world, we got the possible world. In the actual world, P is true, you believe P, you're justified in P. It's not a Gettier case. It looks to me like this is a case where the person has knowledge. S knows that P is true in this world, right? assuming it satisfies these three conditions and it's not a Gettier situation. Looks good. So you know here, but it's possible that you be mistaken. To say that it's possible you be mistaken is to move you over here to this world, right? Where everything stays the same in terms of you believe it, you're justified, it's not a Gettier case, but in this world, the key feature is that P is false. So you don't know in that world. Of course, this raises a question like I pointed out before. I mean, how can I tell which world I'm in? Am I in the actual, how do I know that, or what licenses me in being justified in believing that I'm in the one on the left rather than the one on the right, given that we've got our powerful arguments like the introspective indistinguishability argument, right, that we looked at that says, you know, you could be, for all you know, you're not justified in any of these things, or you don't know any of these things because your experiences would be introspectively indistinguishable. In other words, you couldn't tell from the inside because everything would look exactly the same way. Right? So fallibilism is supposed to provide us with a kind of response to high standard skepticism. And, you know, it's definitely fun stuff to think about. I suppose I embrace some sort of fallibilistic response. I'm inclined to go that way as well. So additional questions about that stuff. If people have any. Or about chapter 6 in general. Happy to say stuff. Yeah, Bettina, sure. So, yeah, let's look at that argument real quick. Let me see if I can find it real fast. I think I left my overheads for that in my office because I was going to think about other stuff. But yeah, so let's find. So the possibility of error argument is over on 114, right? For almost any belief a person has about the external world, and you notice he says for almost any, right? Why is that? Anybody remember? Yeah, but is it an external world belief? I mean, it's the belief that, yeah, I can be certain that I exist so long as I'm thinking that thought. And I guess you're getting me to think about this now, Alan, which is always fun. Does the cogito or some variation on it constitute a belief about the external world? I mean, it's a belief about the self, right? And presumably, embodied selves are parts of the external world. So yeah, that wasn't what I was thinking, but yeah, I was thinking more about things like water is H2O, where you've got, it's a necessary truth because it's an identity statement, right? And so in that case, you know, he qualifies it. I don't think he says that's why, but I suspect that's what he's after. So for almost any belief, or for any contingent belief about the external world, maybe that's another way to put it, that belief could be mistaken. If a belief could be mistaken, then it's not a case of knowledge. Therefore, for almost any contingent belief or any external world belief, the person doesn't know that. No one knows anything or knows very little about the external world. And again, I'm understanding the external world, and I think Feldman is too, the way Descartes does, which is basically everything beyond the immediate contents of your conscious experience. So simple things like that I'm in a room with other people, that I have a body, that the projector is off, that, you know, that the lights are on, all of these things, that this cup is on the table, that's a belief about the external world, because for it to be true on the standard sort of view, it would entail, right, the existence of a cup and a table. And they're not just figments of my imagination. They're not just, I'm having sensory impressions of them, right? But my sensory impressions, according to the story we want to be able to tell, is they're being caused by a thing in the external world that we're not immediately in contact with, at least on a dominant view. There are views according to which you're immediately in touch with these objects. That's called direct realism. But I think that the skeptical arguments make more sense if you assume the kind of view that people like Locke and even Descartes would have, a kind of representational view, where the external world impinges on our senses, and as a result of that we have certain conscious experiences, and then those objects kind of get inferred from that, right? So now to your question, you're asking, how does fallibilism respond to that argument?
Well, yeah, but I just don't understand how, I just don't understand how they
Oh, good.
Like, I don't understand that part.
That was, well, I'm glad I took the time to talk about this some more. Like I said, this is really, this is your course. I mean, you, the students, right? So, I mean, we can race through stuff and say we did it just to do it, but then when it comes test time, if people are confused, it doesn't help things. So, good to take a moment. So it's, be clear here that it's not that knowledge is compatible with error. It's that knowing is compatible with the possibility of error. And that's the crucial thing. So that's the two worlds up here, right? We want to say we're in the one on the left, at least most of the time. But we recognize, and this is where I think the skeptical, at least for me, I mean, epistemology is my area of specialization. And I realize it's not everybody's cup of tea. I mean, I know a lot of philosophers that love social and political philosophy or aesthetics or philosophy of music, and they could care less about epistemology. That's just, philosophers are people. We all have our different interests. It's whatever you really get intrigued by. But, to me, that's from an early age, it was a worrisome thought that, because it occurred to me then, reading Descartes, that, wow, I mean, all of my experiences might not be being caused in the normal way, the common sense way. They might be coming about in some deviant or untoward way, and I would be lulled into believing it, right? I mean, we take it for granted. So the Matrix is the easiest kind of contemporary, analogy or thing that people talk about. The people in the Matrix don't know they're in the Matrix, so they take it for real. Yeah, Alan.
Actually, when you say that, it reminds me of a dream I had a couple of weeks ago, and I told this to the philosophy club. But the dream went, I was sitting in the student lounge, and Professor Vandervossen walks up to me and says, "Hey, Alan, how do you know you're not dreaming right now?" In the dream, he says this to me.
That's great.
I was like, well, I believe I'm not dreaming right now. I mean, everything seems pretty normal. Technology's working just fine. I was watching TV.
Right.
And he was like, okay, well, weird things tend to happen in dreams, right? And boss said this to me.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah. And he's like, okay, so I'm going to flip this coin. And if the coin disappears or stays suspended in the air, then you're dreaming. But if I flip it up and I catch it normally, then you're not dreaming. I was like, okay, Professor, go ahead and flip the coin. And he flips it, and he catches it, and he says, okay, you're not dreaming. And I was like, oh, okay, see, I thought I wasn't dreaming. And as soon as I said that, I woke up.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah,
That's
it
an
was,
awesome.
It was really crazy. I
Yeah.
woke up and I was like,
You weren't on cold medicine or anything like that, right?
I wasn't. I was just blown away because I guess that I was reading this stuff
That's-
and then just thinking about it so much.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, it got into your subconscious or something. That's cool. But yeah, so in any case, I mean, that's this introspective indistinguishability thing and the fact that, everything would seem to you just like it does right now, even if it was totally different. That's the threat of skepticism, right? And so we all want, I mean, not we all, a handful of us would like to be able to say what's wrong with skepticism, to defend the standard view against it, and to also give a diagnosis of the argument, right? As I said before, bringing it all back to the argument, what premise is bad? Well, Feldman's obviously going to reject 4-2 in that argument, right? In argument 6.4, the possibility of error. But notice that it's the possibility of error, not the actuality of error. That's the key thing. But I'm glad you asked the question, because you're not the only person that finds this hard to sort of reconcile. How can I say that I know and yet it's possible I'm mistaken? Well, it's because you're not actually mistaken. It's just you could be in another possible world. Had things been different in certain respects, and it weren't the actual world that you were really in, but this other world, then you could have been fooled, right? I think we have to accept that. I mean, we have to settle in with that possibility, because we don't have conclusive reasons. We don't have conclusive evidence, right, for our contingent empirical beliefs, at least, outside of logic, mathematics, and the cogito, perhaps, and a few thoughts about our own states of mind, maybe. It's the realm of absolute certainty is very small, although there's lots of mathematical and logical knowledge. So yeah, good. Other things people want to talk about in this one before we talk a little bit about skepticism too? And hopefully it won't be too much of a burden for you to write something on. Actually, maybe I'll do this. Maybe I'll post another question, a discussion post tonight as well, and I'll let you write on either one of them. Because we could do that, right? I mean, because I don't know that I'll get through skepticism 2 in time for you to, for us to talk about naturalism next time. So I'll post another one. Has anybody posted on the most recent discussion board? Well, if nobody has, then that's great. So I'll make that one discussion 9 or whatever, and make this next one, or whatever the numbering is. And so you can write about this upcoming chapter here. So other questions? So far good? Okay, so the idea, one idea is that fallibilism provides a response to these skeptical arguments that allows us to the other possibilities he considers, right, are the Morean response, right? And there was one more, what was that? Let's see.
Self-defeating?
Oh, yeah, the idea that skeptics somehow undermine themselves in having to make the claims that they make. Yeah, people, that's a kind of common thing that people like to try to do, is show that so-and-so's claim is self-refuting or self-undermining or something, can't be consistently put forward. Well, Feldman seems to think that there might be ways for, he says 2 things there, if you notice, he kind of dodges it a little bit, even by Rich's standards. He says, look, there might be, certainly there are ways in which skeptics could formulate their challenge or claim that would result in it being self-refuting, right? They say that we know that no one knows anything. Well, you can't say that, right? How can you know that no one knows anything and yet you're making a knowledge claim? But I think the right response there is that they're better versions of skepticism, right? What we want to do is not focus on poorly formulated versions of skeptical challenges, but try to come up with the sharpest, best, most compelling version. And if they don't have to be making claims to knowledge, but rather just, pointing out something about our justification, or arguing that we're better off suspending, and the final point, I guess, is that even if the claims turn out to be self-undermining in some deeper sense, like that they can't formulate their positions in a way without laying claim to knowledge, as Feldman points out, it doesn't seem to analyze the arguments, right? He's given us 4 arguments that all lead to the conclusion that we lack knowledge, at least in the case of the external world, right? We'd like to know what's wrong with those arguments. So a good response, a satisfying response to a skeptical challenge would tell us where the arguments go wrong, I think. And it seems like a reasonable thing to want to get. So I'll start talking a little bit about the second batch, or second part of skepticism here. And if people haven't read it, then it'll be a little tougher to have the discussion. But if you've read some of it, it'll be fine. Let me bring this back up here. All right. So in this chapter 7, right, this is sort of skepticism part 2. And now here we're concerned, he's focused kind of on 2 different problems, or 2 different additional areas of skeptical challenge and inquiry. One of them is the famous problem of induction. Just out of curiosity, show of hands, how many people are familiar with the problem of induction? A little bit, maybe? Yeah. Cool. Anybody want to say what the problem is? Let me hide this first, though. Give you all the answers. That much you should already know, right? So yeah, what's the problem?
Kind of like every crow I've seen up until now is black, so the next one I see is that will be black.
Yep.
And there's no reason there's good reason to believe that the next one will be black, but you don't know for sure. For certain, there's a possibility that you could get like an albino one, or
All those previous crows don't have evidence to, the next color will be the same color.
Okay. I'm just listening to what people are saying. Zach, did you want to weigh in on it too?
Oh, no.
Yeah. So, everybody goes with the crow thing. And it's that and the sun rises tomorrow, right? Those are the famous ones from Hume. It can be anything, yeah, right.
Induction, if you're starting with an assumption and you're saying, well, it's been this way so far that I've seen it like every single time. So based off of that, I'm gonna go ahead and say it's gonna be like this again next time. So it's like me saying,
Yeah.
every day we come to class, you've been to class here before me. So when I come to class on Wednesday, you're gonna be here in class before me.
Right.
Well, that's
And I will. Guarantee
yeah,
you.
see, I could skip Professor Bottom's class before that and be sitting here waiting just to beat you.
Right. Or I
you
could
have-
fail to come.
Yeah, or you could be sick, or
Right.
you could, something else could happen. It's not necessarily a guarantee. Like, with induction, we have a pretty good reason to believe it, but
Right.
we don't know for certain.
Yeah, Alan.
The conclusion
Yeah.
of inductive arguments, is not proven to follow from the premises.
Right. Yeah. Good. Excellent. So some good thoughts there. So yeah, I mean, this is sort of famously sort of put out by Hume, right, or sort of talked about in Hume's treatise, and he points us out using this example about the sun rising tomorrow, right? Just to get us all on the same page, which I think we are, but I have it here just in case, to remind us, right, what a deductive argument is, what a valid argument is, an inductive argument and a cogent argument. So the valid arguments are the ones where if the premises are true, then the conclusions have to be true, right? And valid arguments are examples of deductive reasoning. We say, and typically when you hear the word follows, somebody says, well, your conclusion doesn't follow. That's always frustrating because there's the strict sense in which for a conclusion to follow from its premises, the truth of the premises or the assumption of the truth of the premises needs to entail the truth of the conclusion. And that's the deductive sense of a conclusion follows validly. But people oftentimes, when they're talking about what are clearly inductive cases or inductive arguments, they'll still say the same kind of stuff, like the conclusion doesn't follow. But what they mean there has to be something different, because otherwise it's just not interesting. We've already acknowledged that it's an inductive argument. I mean, there's this joke, I can't get it right, I'm bad at telling jokes, but somebody points out kind of in this Humean vein that there's the problem of induction is that the truth of the premises in an inductive argument are always compatible with the falsity of the conclusion. Right? It's like, well, that's not a problem. That's just induction. that's the difference between deduction and induction, right? I mean, and philosophers historically, I think it's fair to say have, there's been a real bias in favor of deduction and deductive reasoning. Not a bias that's like good or bad per se. It's just you can see why there's been an emphasis and a focus there, because it's much easier. In some ways, it's a lot better understood. Right? I mean, Aristotle, goes through and explains these categorical syllogisms in antiquity, and deductive logic provides certainty for the conclusions of these arguments on the assumption that the premises are true, and you get a guarantee. And so it's clean and tidy in a lot of ways, and it can be modeled formally for those taking logic right now. You know that. I mean, you could do this stuff in a very precise, formal way. The logic of inductive reasoning is nothing like that. I mean, that's not my area of expertise, but some of the stuff that I know has been done, people like Carnap, Rudolf Carnap is a famous mid 20th century philosopher of science, logician, philosopher of language, made a lot of contributions to a lot of areas and a lot of formal work. And he attempted to formulate a logic of inductive reasoning. And you look at the book, and it just looks like you're in Calculus 3 or something, right? It just gets crazy looking. So, our sort of grip on inductive reasoning maybe hasn't been, our understanding of it hasn't been as clear, and it's not as amenable to clean formulation. But in any case, so a cogent argument, I'm using the word cogent. Other people mean different things by that, but I'm just adopting Feldman's terminology from a different context from his Reason and Argument book, his intro book. And some people use just so you know, some people when they're talking about inductive reasoning, what they mean by cogent is an argument that has an inductive form, an inductive pattern, and all of whose premises are true and or reasonable for you to believe. They'll call that, so they would say like an argument is inductively strong if it has the right pattern, and then an argument is cogent if it's inductively strong and the premises are true or the premises are reasonable, however they want to put it. So it would then parallel saying an argument is valid versus saying an argument is sound. Valid arguments have certain kinds of forms, right? The forms that where the premises guarantee the conclusions, they have these tight connections, and then whether the premises are true is what determines whether it's a sound argument or not. So in any case, yeah, I mean, it sounds like some people have been exposed to this so-called problem of induction, Hume's problem. And as people are saying, I mean, the basic idea is, as I understand it, first of all, are we justified in our inductive inferences? And if so, then what's our justification, right? Does induction provide us with knowledge? And according to the standard view, which we're sort of still assuming in the background, we know a lot of things. Among the things we know are conclusions arrived at vis-a-vis induction, right? So the example involving the crows, you've looked at a ton of crows, and everyone that's passed by has been black. They're asking you what, if you have to, form a belief about the color of the next crow, what's reasonable for you to believe? Well, in general, I mean, if you've seen enough of them, right, that's one of the things to keep in mind. I mean, inductive inferences get better as the sample size goes up, right, as the n gets bigger. So, if you've only seen 2 or 3 crows, right, that's not going to confer a lot of probability on a conclusion that the next one's likely to be black. But if let's just suppose everyone you've ever observed, and you've lived a long time, you're my age, you've seen a lot of crows. I actually have seen some crows. There's a ton of them around. But in any case, yeah, and so they're asking you to sort of make a wager on the next one, right? Seems reasonable to believe it, but Hume formulates this kind of puzzle about how we can get justified in those kinds of beliefs. Just as a side thing, there are different kinds of induction, right? So there's enumerative induction, which is you've got a whole bunch of cases sort of mounted up. Think about like, you've got a big urn. You can't see inside it, a big opaque container, and it's filled with marbles. And you turn the little lever, and a purple marble comes out. And you've got nothing else to do with your time in your life. And so you sit there and do that 1,000,000 times. And every time you turn it, right, it's like a gumball machine, a purple one comes out, right? That's kind of enumerative induction, where you're just building up cases. And based on, again, the number of the size of the group, large n's or better, you draw the conclusion about the color of the next one. There's inferences to the best explanation, which are, again, typically that's an inductive approach, right? The idea is that you've got some phenomena, let's say, that you want to account for, you want to explain it, and there are a couple of different explanations on the table that would do the trick. We want to draw a conclusion and say, well, it's the common sense hypothesis, let's say, over some skeptical hypothesis. That's the better explanation, even though we know that our evidence is compatible, right, with the falsity of the common sense hypothesis. And then finally, there are these past to future. A lot of people, Feldman makes a lot out of this, and I think it's worth spending a minute on. A lot of people sort of automatically equate induction with past to future, and they'll talk about past to future principles or something like that. But it's really better, and this is, I think, a subtlety, but one worth sort of pointing out. Better to think about induction not as past to future. I mean, sure, past to future reasoning. It's been this way every time in the past, so probably it'll be this way the next time. We engage in that on a day-to-day basis. We do it without even thinking about it, right? Sort of almost automatically. That's certainly induction, but as Feldman points out, it's really it doesn't have to be past to future, right? It could be from right now, retrodictively to the past, right? So you can go the other direction, and what it really comes down to is it's observed cases and unobserved cases. So using whatever information you've got about all the observed cases to draw some sort of conclusion about unobserved cases is what we're really talking about. Not necessarily. So the tense part of it, the past to future part of it, is less critical. It's just that those examples get used all the time. All right, so and you guys stop me as I'm going through this, because I know not everybody's had a chance to read it all yet, and it'd be preferable for that to be the case. But, so as I say, his problem is what justifies us in these things. And here's the argument. So we can talk about this for a second here. So Hume's argument, should be Hume's skeptical argument against induction. I got a typo there. So the first premise, right, if the past to future principle can be justified at all, then it can be justified either by a demonstrative argument or by what he calls a moral argument. Moral arguments don't have anything to do here in this context with morality. That's just Hume speak for a non-deductive type of an argument, right? An inference from observed facts. And so then the second premise here, only necessary truths can be justified by demonstrative arguments. The past to future principle isn't a necessary truth. That's just to say that even though in the past every day the sun has risen, there's no contradiction in the idea that we wake up tomorrow and the sun hasn't risen, right? Some strange thing happens and takes the sun out. That would be bad news, but very bad news. So then that gets us 1 through 3 would get us that looks like we can't, or 2 through 3 can't get it justified based on deductive reasoning, right? Demonstrative arguments. All moral arguments, according to this version, right, assume the truth, either explicitly or implicitly, of some version of inductive reasoning, right? So any moral argument for the thing would have to assume the truth of it, then he just fleshes it out from here, right? Any argument that assumes the truth of the principle it's supposed to be arguing for is circular, and so it looks like we can then conclude here, can't be justified by a moral argument. So it looks like the past to future principle, if that's the best way of formulating the inductive principle, can't be justified. This is bad news. This is a skeptical conclusion that, if taken seriously, would severely curtail what we ordinarily think we know about the world, because, as I say, and Feldman points out, in everyday life we make inductive inferences all the time about mundane matters, but even maybe more to the point, the vast majority of scientific reasoning in the natural sciences is built up on inductive reasoning. Hence the need to try to defend it. So let me just stop for a second here and give you guys a chance to kind of think about the argument and see if you've got thoughts or questions on it.
What's the mean by demonstrative argument?
That's an argument where the conclusion would follow necessarily, like a deductive argument. Yeah.
When you say he was using moral argument?
Yeah, for him, moral argument just means not a deductive argument, in which case he's assuming the only other category of arguments is going to be some sort of inductive reasoning. Right. So, what do people think? Everybody now ready to give up on induction, call it a day? It's over.
Premise 2.
Yeah.
Is that true? So I was just thinking about it, and it seems a little bit too easy.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point, actually. Maybe the way Hume's understanding demonstrative argument, he thinks that's true. I mean, that's maybe built into it. But if the question is, can't you have a good deductive reasoning for a conclusion that's only contingently true? Is that what you're thinking? Then it looks like you can.
Yeah.
I thought it was more along the lines of, can there be necessary truths without having to use deductive reasoning to get the necessary truth?
Can we reason inductively to necessary truths? You got an example in mind?
Not really, but it just doesn't seem like that you have to
Oh.
use
Yeah.
reasoning.
Well, it gets complicated, right? Because, I mean,
Every red thing I've seen so far has been colored.
right. Yep, that's a necessary truth.
But other than necessary
All red.
require,
All red things are colored, but he's building into it that every one that he's seen to try to,
To make it inductive.
yeah.
It's not quite working, I can see what you're saying
you might think that it is true that this is what I think Feldman would say back if he were here, which I wish he were. It'd be fun to have him come visit and let you guys get to talk to the man himself. I think he would say, yeah, it is true that every red thing you've seen so far has been colored, but it doesn't stop there. The reason why that's true is because all red things are colored. And we can, that's a conceptual truth that is necessarily true, right? But it's arrived at, although you could, it's what provides the foundation for the quasi-inductive claim that you've come up with, which is clever. I give you that. But I think he would say, yeah, it's only in virtue of, or it's because all red things are colored as a necessary truth. And it's about concepts. It has to do with the meanings of these things, right? I mean, I haven't talked much about the analytic-synthetic distinction, but Kant is famous for sort of developing that. And the idea is to try to give, at least in part, an account of necessity and a priority in terms of the predicate concept being somehow contained within the subject concept.
What about like laws of nature that would like derive?
Yeah.
Those aren't necessarily exactly right. Sorry.
Oh no, I mean I'm with you on that. So you're thinking like, it doesn't. It would be weird to the point of people screaming and running out the door if I were to release this and it suddenly flew up to the ceiling, right? But it would be a violation of universal gravitation, right? Of law of gravity.
And that's
But
not really necessary.
but it's not a necessary truth. The law of gravity. Yeah, so I take it, I think the standard view, I mean, again, you never know, you go out on a limb when you say stuff, but especially when you're on Swivl. But, no, he said it. You can see him saying it right there. All right, I got it wrong. Sometimes you have to be humble. You have to admit these things. But no, my view is that, and I think a lot of other people's view, most people's view is that laws of nature are not necessary truths. They're physically necessary. So like maybe, I hope this is helping and making sense, but
Like there could be an alternate universe where the force of gravity is
yeah. Oh yeah, there's none at all, or what? Right. So I mean, we've got to have, there's different senses of possibility. So this is, so let this be like the space of logical possibility. Something's logically possible for us right now, or our purposes, just in case it's not contradictory. But there are going to be a whole lot of things that maybe aren't contradictory, but that we can't do, right? So think about like, this would be, let's say, what's physically possible, right? So this is what's possible given what we think are the laws of physics right now, right? Certainly some of these things could turn out to be false, as they have, right? Science is constantly finding out new things, and suppose faster than light travel turns out to be possible. Well, then we're wrong on that one. It's not a law of nature, right? It doesn't seem to be contradictory. There doesn't seem to be anything contradicting in the idea of a thing going faster than the speed of light, ruled out presumably by special theory of relativity, but people still talk about this stuff, right? So there's a lot, and I should make a point that there's a lot of people like to talk about this category, which is, I think, kind of a tough one to get clear on, but so there's logical possibility, metaphysical possibility, and physical possibility. So metaphysical possibility presumably be even broader, somewhere between the two, right? But then in addition, you could talk about what's technologically possible. That's what's possible given current technology or some specification of the scope of the technology. We could talk about what's epistemically possible. That's what's compatible or possible given what we know, right? And so on. So there's a bunch of different grades of possibility. What most people do, I think, is just say, work with the broadest one of all. Because naturally you're kind of inclined to ask a question like, well, which one's the real possibility? Like, we're interested in deriving conclusions about the world, and we need to know what the relevant sense of possibility is, but typically philosophers just stick with logical possibility. Granted, that's the widest domain of all, so you might think, well, finding out that it's logically possible that there'd be artificially intelligent beings isn't nearly as interesting as something like finding out that it's metaphysically possible, because there you'd have to kind of imagine all different sorts of worlds where these things would have to, let's say, be embodied somehow, or how would it actually work out, right? So there's different grades of this, but presumably, how did we get on this topic now? I'm trying to remember. Back to Alan's question about the every red thing? Yeah. So it's... Oh, yeah. Okay, good, yeah. So, and that was brought up, Robin brought that up with the laws of nature. So I'm assuming the laws of nature are not necessary truths in the broadest sense of the word, right? They're not logically necessary. They're just physically necessary. Necessary given what we believe to be the true laws of physics, but who knows what those are, right? And physics is incomplete still, so there's more work to be done. So, in looking at this argument, you're back to your original question about is two true, that only necessary truths can be justified by demonstrative arguments. So the question is, can we have some contingent truths demonstrated deductively? Yeah.
So wouldn't that be like a if then kind of
I'm trying to think about. Yeah, well, go ahead. Yeah.
Now, so I was just kind of thinking, like, the mind work in that direction was like, we have to like think like a if then deductive argument.
Let's see what Feldman says about Hume talking about demonstrative arguments here. Let's see. Here Hume's, and this is at top of 133. Here Hume says that the reasoning in inductive inferences is not demonstrative. That is to say, the conclusions could be false even though the premises are true. Right? That seems right. So, does Feldman ever attack premise 2? I don't think he does he? Let's see. He says down at the bottom of 134, where he's talking about the argument after he sets it up, he says, yeah, they all seem reasonable. And he points out that the problem is not dependent on high standard skepticism, which is interesting. So, well, I mean, think about it. Yeah, this is right. He's right. I mean, I'm getting tired. It's been a long day already. But yeah, think about it, because you couldn't have a case where you get a necessary truth inductively, right? Because presumably part of what we're meaning there is that it'd be possible for all the premises to be true and the conclusion be false. But a necessary truth can never be false under any circumstances. So it seems right. It's part of what's hard, and this is just a fact about working with historical philosophers, right? Like if you go back and you read Descartes, or you read Hobbes or Hume or whoever, at Leibniz is like this. I was doing philosophy of religion stuff this morning and talking about the problem of evil, and he's got this sort of threefold way of characterizing various kinds of evil, and he uses moral evil to mean something different than what you would think of. And so you just you have to work through their terminology, but we shouldn't hassle them too much about that, because they're inventing a lot of this stuff at the same time. When you're pioneering it, you get a pass a little bit, right? And even if the terminology doesn't really stick in the longer run. So that seems right. So I mean, looks like the argument is good. I mean, and ironically, it's a deductive the argument as a whole looks like it's a deductive argument against the past to future principle. right? So that it can't be justified. So he comes up with 3 different responses that he wants to consider. Here they are. So we've got an inductive defense of induction, which you might just think from the title. This doesn't bode well. You've got the pragmatic defense, which will appeal to folks who just want to somehow feel better about the fact that we can't help but perform inductions all the time, right? I mean, that's sort of Hume's line, actually, at the end of the day, right? I mean, Hume's notorious for this kind of thing, where he'll just, very skeptically inclined about a lot of stuff. And if you've read Hume in other classes, you know this. But oftentimes what he'll do at the end is he'll just say, well, based on our philosophical inquiry, this turns out to not make any sense, or this turns out to be unjustified, or this is, somehow mixed up or incoherent or something. But the good news is, we're animals in the material world, and we can't help. It's a habit of belief. We can't help but do this. It's just part of how we are. So like with cause and effect, right? His analysis is sort of, it's fairly anemic. You'd want something a little bit more robust if you're really taking causes, I think, seriously, or if you're a realist about causation. And yet you get this kind of, well, it's just constant conjunction, cause coming before the effect, and then a habit of belief in us that gets inculcated over time, where we see, the one thing happen and we automatically form the belief that the effect is going to follow. But that's about the analysis of causation, right? Same sort of thing about the self, right? Hume's very skeptical about the idea of a substantial or substantival self. He says, well, when I retreat within myself, all I ever come across is this particular sensation and that. I never encounter the self of whom those sensations are supposed to belong to. They're supposed to belong. And so that generates what they call the bundle theory of the self, right? The self is just a bundle of perceptions, which is different than, say, like a Cartesian kind of theory where the self is a soul, and all of those perceptions you get the perceptions, but the perceptions belong to something, right? A lot of these kind of debates have a similar kind of form, like debates over properties between realists and nominalists, right? So realists want to, say that a substance and its properties are 2 different things, whereas other people might just want to say, well, the idea of substance is mysterious or incoherent, and all we've really got is a bundle theory of properties. A thing just as a collection of properties. So this kind of gets echoed and parroted back in a lot of other debates. So there's the pragmatic defense, and then the a priori defense. So let me show you the first one here. And I will try. I don't know if I'll get a chance to get it done today or not, but I'm trying to think of the last batch of notes that I put out for you guys. Do you remember? What was it? Was it there's nothing on skepticism out there yet, right? I think it was just the non-evidentialist stuff was the last stuff. I'll try to get this stuff put. Part of the problem is I don't have the original electronic versions of these, and so I have to give them to Maggie, and then she's got a printer scanner thing in there that can turn them into PDFs for me and email them to me. So I'll try to get this out there for you, but just as a guide. So here's the inductive argument for the past to future principle. Do we need to see that principle again for people to remember it? So this is, again, he formulates several versions of these things. He's got this past to future reason principle, which is a different thing where he ultimately goes. But so the future will be like the past. In other words, if X percentage of perceived A's or B's, then X percent of unobserved A's will be B's. All right? And again, bear in mind, as I say, and Feldman says it, and really, the past to future part's kind of a smokescreen. It could work the other way as well. I mean, I've observed a whole bunch of crows that have been black in my experience, and I want to infer that in the past, when I wasn't around to do the observing, they were black back then as well. All right, same sort of deal. So the best to think of it in terms of an inference from the observed to the unobserved, where we know that kind of move outstrips our evidence. Strictly, it outstrips our evidence in the sense that the evidence we've got doesn't entail the truth of those conclusions, and this is pretty fundamental stuff. So PF has been true in the past, therefore PF will be true in the future. All right, if this argument's sound, then premise 5 of Hume's argument can be, we can get rid of that. Premise 5 is the one that says all moral arguments assume a truth, where moral arguments are inductive arguments. And does anybody, I mean, if anybody's read far enough into it to know, does anybody remember what Feldman points out about this? That's a kind of subtle point. Oh, 5, so you didn't like 5.
Yeah, it seems like it wouldn't have to maybe assume the truth, yeah, but I also haven't sat and thought about it long enough for me to eliminate all the possibilities.
Right, right. Well, I mean, here's a kind of quick gloss on what goes on, and you can go back and read it, before our next meeting and stuff. He points out that, well, there's kind of two ways that an argument can assume something. It can assume it explicitly or implicitly, right? And if you look at this argument, I mean, you've got a statement here talking about that the past to future principle PF has been true in the past, and then we infer the conclusion that PF will be true in the future. But PF itself, the principle, isn't explicit in here, right? Because premise 1 isn't what PF says. It's talking about PF. But PF itself is this principle, right? So it's not, the argument's not, it's not circular in the sense that it explicitly assumes what it's trying to prove, but he then goes on in the next paragraph or whatever and says, yeah, but it's implicitly circular, right? Because what we're doing here is we're moving from a fact about the past to an inference about a future fact that's uniform with that, right? And that would have to assume something like that principle. So it does look like it, quote unquote, begs the question at the end of the day, and that's what he says at least. What do people think? Seem right? All right, so on to the pragmatic defense. Let's see that one. All right, so pragmatic argument for it. And people are fans of this kind of stuff. I mean, I'm not usually very, I guess I'm sort of not pragmatic. I'm in philosophy. What do you say, right? I mean, if I were very pragmatic, I probably wouldn't be doing this. So, but in any case, so here's the argument. If any general policy, so the rough idea behind this is, look, what justifies our inductive inferences? Well, it can't be that they've always worked in the past and therefore we're justifying the principle, because that's assuming what we're trying to establish. That's the inductive approach. It looks like it's at least implicitly circular. Here's another idea. Look, inductive inferences are justified from a utilitarian standpoint or from an instrumentalist or pragmatic or practical standpoint, because if any way of forming beliefs about the unobserved based on the observed is going to work, then induction will work. Right? In other words, it may not be, and this is a point that Feldman makes ultimately as a kind of criticism. It may turn out that induction's just the best from among a whole bunch of bad options, and that's not satisfying if you're trying to give a defense of induction that makes you feel good about it, right? As opposed to just, all right, I've got all these horrible options and I'll do this one. But if any general policy for forming beliefs about unobserved cases is likely to lead to true beliefs, then induction will. If that's true, then we're justified in accepting the past to future principle. So that gets us to here, right? For some general policy for forming beliefs about unobserved cases is likely to lead to true beliefs. So we're justified in accepting PF. What do people think about this one? Because there's some stuff to say on this if you wanted to. Well, you tend to be kind of a pragmatic guy, right?
I'd like to think so.
Yeah, I mean,
I mean, if it does, if it gives you a 51% chance of predicting something versus 49, it's better. It's not a lot better, but
Right. I mean,
so it's a sensible.
let's try to. Tamir, did you? Sorry to see a hand there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Based on the Oh, so you're just saying this seems fishy to you in a similar kind of circularity?
Yeah.
Okay, cool, thanks, yeah. I'll read, over on 136, you can see what he says. Some philosophers have noted that inductive reasoning has certain advantages over competing strategies. I'm trying to remember, I think this might be Reichenbach. Hans Reichenbach, I think, wrote, this is part of his sort of strategy of defending induction. Either that or Karl Popper. It's one of those guys, I guarantee you. Two related analogies will bring out the idea. First, consider a situation in which a doctor is going to perform an operation on a patient. Doctor's not certain the operation will work, but she does know, A, if anything will work, this will work. That doesn't inspire confidence. I'd like him to also say, oh, and by the way, something will work, and this is it. You'd have to be pretty desperate, right? To take a second case, suppose that you're put in the following unfortunate situation. This is classic. Did you guys read this one? You're forcefully taken into a locked room. Where are we? What's going on here? And told, I'd like to know what he was thinking at that point. And told that whether or not you'll be allowed to live. This is sounds like the script from Hostel or something, right? Whether you're allowed to live depends on whether you win or lose a wager. The object of the wager is a box with red, blue, yellow, and orange lights on it. You know nothing about the construction of the box, but are told that either all the lights, some of them, or none will come on. If the colored light you choose comes on, you live. If not, you die. But before you make your choice, you're also told that neither the blue, nor the yellow, nor the orange light can come on without the red also coming on. If this is the only information you have, then you'll surely bet on red. Right? In this situation, it's true that if any bet will be successful, then a bet on red will be successful. Well, I mean, yeah, we were hoping for more, but I guess we'll take what we can get. So what do people think about this? I mean, I agree with Tamir that you might get the feeling that there's some covertly somehow maybe we're sneaking in some sort of circularity or something, but that'd have to be shown, that'd have to be precisely kind of pointed out. But I mean, there's one obvious thing you can say right off the bat, right, is what gets us justified in believing for? I mean, what if you live in a world, I mean, we think, many of us think, we want to believe that we live in a world that's underwritten by regularities like laws of nature and things like that, but we've, to take the Humean point again from his dialogues concerning natural religion, Cleanthes says, but we're talking about the teleological argument, right, that we've only observed a very small portion of our universe for a very short time. And it's not as though we've had, this is in a different context, right? I mean, there he's trying to make the case for the argument from design, or setting out the argument from design. But then they point out that, well, we really don't have that much information on how universes get started and what their careers are like and how they end. And for all we know, this is the only universe we've got, although people could speculate about a multiverse or whatever. What would be better in terms of, for our position in drawing some sort of conclusions, is if we'd had a chance to observe millions of universes from start to finish and see what their patterns are like, but we're not in that situation. So right off the bat, I mean, it's an assumption of the argument to get the conclusion to go through that some general policy for forming beliefs about heretofore unobserved cases is likely to lead to true beliefs. That assumes a kind of underlying uniformity of nature, right? A kind of regular universes or standard universes rather than bizarre, exotic, non-standard, deviant universes. We'd like to believe we're not in one of those things, but again, Cleanthes' point. So I think that's the main thing he says. Let's see about this one. Yeah, he says that this is over on 137, talking about the self-correcting nature of induction, which is appealing to people like Reichenbach and Popper, the philosophy of science guys from that time. Furthermore, the point about the self-correcting nature of induction is a bit misleading. If nature's uniform, then induction will eventually lead to good principles, but if it's not, induction need not. There's no guarantee that induction will yield good principles for forming beliefs about unobserved things. This is the case like the tea leaves, like what makes it more reasonable for you to base your beliefs about unobserved cases, let's say future cases, on past experiences of that certain sort, as opposed to going to the astrologer or the tea leaf reader, right? We know that that's a good way of forming beliefs based on, say, your past experiences, if you've got sufficiently many of them and they've been regular. But that shaking the 8 ball or reading the tea leaves, that's not a good way to form beliefs about these unobserved cases. Well, why is induction better? Well, because even if those methods were to ultimately start to become reliable, induction would eventually sanction them, right? So what would happen is if all of a sudden, suppose people started making investments in the stock market not based on charts and graphs and their 5-year averages or whatever, right? But instead went to this one tea leaf reader. This one tea leaf reader was just getting it right all the time about like which stock to buy, and it seems irrationally crazy, right? Like going to the witch doctor or something. But suppose, well, eventually the word would get out, presumably, and there'd be enough cases of this person making these predictions based on the tea leaves that induction would say, okay, well then that's a method that's, a bunch of cases have now been observed of the tea leaf reader getting it right, and induction itself will sanction the method, which is kind of slick. I mean, that's a cool idea, and that's nice to know. But as Feldman points out, there's some limitations to what, at least how satisfying this is. The final one, just so I can get it out there and make a little progress here. The final one, of course, is the a priori justification of induction, which sounds like a contradiction, right? How do you get an a priori defense of induction? Because typically our inductive beliefs are just that. They're beliefs that are contingently true, and they're arrived at a posteriori on the basis of lots of cases of observation, right? So are we all good on the a priori, a posteriori distinction? So a statement's a priori just in case you can, as soon as you understand what it says, you're in a position to know that it's true or be justified in believing it. A statement's a posteriori just in case it's not a priori, and or it's one where some observations, broadly speaking, have to be made of the world in order to get justified in believing it. So what Feldman does here is kind of slick. He says, compare these two principles. Here's PF. This is what we're out to justify, right? But there's this other principle lurking in the woods. Now, PF is a kind of, notice it's not an epistemological claim. It's a claim about the uniformity of nature or some sort of underlying regularities that'll hold up. I guess you would say this is that the future will be like the past, I suppose, is a metaphysical principle. I have to think about that a little bit, how I would classify it. Anybody got any thoughts on how you classify that principle? It's not a principle of logic, it doesn't seem like. It seems like is it a principle of science? It's not a scientific law, even.
It seems like a physical or metaphysical.
Yes, I think kind of.
I've never seen the law, like the speed
Yeah.
of light doesn't change. So,
Yeah, but I'm thinking that it might be even more basic than a physical principle, like a metaphysical principle, for the reason that we want to be able to explain regularities at the physical level on the basis of some deeper principle that would be something like this, maybe. So we got this principle here, but this is talking about what we've known, what we know, right? So this is an epistemological analog of the past to future principle. And Feldman's point is that, well, he might be right about PF, but and it's fair for somebody to come back and say, well, look, I mean, that's what we're trying to justify. You sort of switch topics on us, right? I mean, we're trying to get PF justified, not PFR. And this is some move that Russell made, Bertrand Russell. He sort of formulates this idea of PFR, and even if PF's not something that can be established through a priori means, it's arguable that PFR is an a priori principle about rationality, about reasonableness, right? I mean, if you know that a whole bunch of past cases have been a certain way, it does seem like that provides you with a reason for thinking that future cases will be that way, unless you've got defeaters or something, right? Extra information. So there's an argument that goes along with this. This is the revised argument. And now what we can do is we can reject this right here, 3, the claim that PFR is not a necessary truth. If Feldman's right and it is a necessary truth about reasoning, then we can say that 3 in the revised argument's okay. It's still less than fully satisfying because, as I say, we started off trying to justify the past to future principle, right? We end up justifying something different about the concept of rationality when it comes to inductive inferences, but maybe the best that we can do. So there's that part, and then the next thing that is in the chapter is the stuff on ordinary standard skepticism and best explanations. So I'll stop with this for now. For next time, if you hadn't read Skepticism Part 2, it's not your fault, but do it. I'll be focused on the second half of that, and then try to get as much into naturalized epistemology as you can. I've already got the discussion on naturalized epistemology out there, so I'll post another one on the ordinary standards skepticism, and we can talk about both of, maybe get through a little bit of both of them next time. We'll see. I don't want to rush it. But that if we do the second half of chapter 7 next time, Skepticism 2, then we could do naturalized epistemology on next Monday, and then relativism on Wednesday, and then that would set us up for the student stuff. But, very good. Well, thanks, guys. I appreciate it. I will see you next time.